Okay, first structure here on the cranium is the nasal septum. The nasal septum, like the name says, septum, will make sure that it separates your nasal cavity into two compartments, so the right and left sides of the nasal cavity. The nasal septum is formed by the fusion of two bones. The bottom half is formed by the vomer, which is a bone of its own, and the top half is formed by the perpendicular plate, which is a feature of the ethmoid bone. So if we turn here and we look inside of the skull, we can also see part of the ethmoid bone coming up over here. Two more features of the ethmoid bone are the crista galli, which is this little triangular structure coming out over here, and the next one is the cribriform plate, which is this plate over here that has all these little holes where your olfactory nerves are going to pass through. Okay, so all these structures, crista galli, the cribriform plate, together with the perpendicular plate, which forms the top part of the nasal septum, all belong to the ethmoid bone. The next bone that we can talk about right over here is your cheekbone, which is the zygomatic bone. The next one, and you have two zygomatics, one on the left side and one on the right side. The next structure that we can talk about is your temporal bone, which is the bone on the side over here, which we had talked about previously. But you have a few features that you need to know on the temporal bone. The first one is your external acoustic meatus, or external auditory meatus. So like the name says, it's going to be located on the external part of the cranium, and that's what's going to connect on the inside to the internal acoustic meatus, or internal auditory meatus or canal. The next structure that's also part of your temporal bone is this big bump right over here, which is called your mastoid process. You're going to have a few muscles that are going to attach to it. Then you're going to have this pointy structure over here, which is called your styloid process. So if you can remember from coming from your stylus pen, it looks like a little pen. Then we have the mandibular fossa, which we had talked about previously, but that's where the mandibular condyle is going to articulate. So this is your mandibular condyle that belongs to the mandible, is going to articulate right over here on the mandibular fossa. And the last structure that belongs to the temporal bone is your carotid canal, which is this little hole right over here. So it's supposed to go through, even though it doesn't go through on this model. But here's where your carotid artery is going to pass through. And because we don't have a carotid vein and we don't have a jugular artery, they're the ones that correspond to each other. So that's why they run parallel to each other. So remember how this was the jugular foramen passing over here on the occipital bone, and this is your carotid canal on your temporal bone. The last bone that we need to talk about is your sphenoid bone, which is this butterfly-shaped bone right over here. And the sphenoid bone is going to contain a few holes, which we call either foramen or canal or even fissures. The first ones that I want you to look at is better sometimes to see inside of the orbit, but you're going to have this hole that looks rounded inside of the eye is going to be your optic canal. And if you come on the back, you're going to see exactly where it's coming out through. And because the optic canal is the passageway from the optic nerve, and you know that the optic nerve will go all the way back here to the part of the brain that is your visual cortex, and it stays right over here in the back. So it needs to be a hole that runs this way. A couple more holes that we need to talk here inside of the orbit are the fissures. So see how these are more elongated, narrow passageways? So these are your fissures. You have a superior fissure, which is called superior orbital, because it's inside the eye fissure. And then you're going to have an inferior orbital fissure. Now it's important for you to remember or notice that the superior orbital fissure If you look on the inside, you can see where it's going to be coming out on the inside of the cranium. But the inferior orbital fissure, if you want to see where it comes out, it actually comes right over here next to your zygomatic bone, so you don't see it on the inside of the cranium. And a few more that you need to know are 3 little holes that you have right over here. This one, and this one, and they go in order. This one would be your foramen rotundum, so it's sort of roundish. This one is your foramen ovale, because it's sort of oval. And the last one is your foramen spinosum, which is this one right over here. And if you can remember ROS, like R-O-S, so rotundum, ovale, spinosum. I'm sure the girls will remember ROS really well, right? But foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, foramen spinosum. And the last feature that you need to know that's really important is the saddle-like structure, which is called sella turcica, and this is where your pituitary gland is going to sit. So it's sort of protected in this bony structure.